Hello and welcome to the Superwoman Life. My guest today is Asha Thornton Clearwater, and Asha is a content coach. Welcome to the Superwoman Life, Asha. I'm so pleased to have you here.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Kate. It's good to be here. Thank you. On this very warm day, hence my fairy air.
So warm. So Asha, I know that you have overcome some enormous things in your life and you are the epitome of a superwoman. But would you like to just give us a little bit of background so that everybody else knows a little bit about where you've come from and what you've managed to overcome?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Kate. That's a very kind introduction. I never see it in that way. I just think, well, it's just life and you've got a choice. You either work through it with the challenges and go forward in as positive a mindset as you can, or you don't. And so for me, I guess one of the biggest things in recent years has been my MS diagnosis. I was diagnosed about 12 years ago. I kind of knew quite a bit about it because I grew up with a mum with multiple sclerosis, and I knew what it could do to the body and the mind. She suffered an incredible amount, but never let it get to her. She always fought through it, and she continues to be my inspiration. She died about 4 or 5 years ago now, but she's still in here and very much part of who I am. And whenever I think I'm having a bad day, I just remember my mum because she's my superhero. So that was a biggie for me. And coming through that, getting that diagnosis, I actually found out about it in a letter, which was interesting. Not an appointment with the GP, not a phone call, a letter. And I can remember ringing up my partner, who's now my wife at the time, and reading these words, those two words that meant so much in so many ways because of my background. That was a bit of a shock. So that was the first big shock. Also having, I guess, some of my family that didn't take too kindly me being together with a woman. So I had quite a bit of homophobia from people around me. That was quite difficult to live with. And so we got through that, and Taz and I have been together 22 years this year, so I'm still very happy, which is wonderful. She's my absolute rock. So she's also one of my super women, because she's incredible. So that was quite tough. And then I think everything that I hadn't dealt with mentally, as we know, if we don't talk about these things, I'm one of those people that typical introvert really, will hold it in and have to be really encouraged to let it out and talk about it, because it's not important. I'm very good at being there for other people, but not allowing other people into my world and my issues. So because I did that and I didn't really talk about things, obviously I talked about it with Taz and she was amazing, but having that other input from other people is also very important in the healing process. And because of that, I held it until about 3 years ago. I think now what I can only describe as a breakdown. I think we're supposed to say, instead of breakdown, we're supposed to say break, a mental break. But it was tough, and so it made me really, really evaluate my life and my working life, particularly because I've worked for myself for about 20 years now. And of course, my business suffered as a result of that. Taz had to carry the burden of my partner. I'm very grateful for that, but we've also helped each other through various times in our lives. So that's been tough, and I lost my writing and all that. And for me, my go-to place is writing, is content, is storytelling, as it is for many people. It's such a healing process, writing. You know that. I know you're a great writer too. And so now I've turned it around, and I've changed my business from being a very PR-focused business to now working with owners of small businesses to create their own content, encouraging them to be the storytellers in their business and for their business. And that's so amazing to see. I've just run a couple of content workshops online, my first two via Zoom, which was an interesting techie challenge. But I've had really good feedback, and I loved it because we themed it all in with movies. That's another one of my passions, and I love it. And I love seeing the light in people's eyes when they rediscovered why they fell in love with their business in the first place, through writing about it, through sharing some of this content. So, and that's me. How's that?
That's amazing, isn't it? And I love the fact that you alluded to one of my favourite quotes, which is "Be the hero of your own story." Like that's one of my absolute favourites, because I think you're so typical. I know that I can relate to the fact that, everything that I've been through in my life, I don't think about at all, because like you say, when you hit with hardship, you just keep going. You've got no choice. But not everybody can do that, and not everybody does do that. That's the fact of the matter, isn't it? And I think that's where you find that inner hero. That's where you find out that, nobody else can change it for you, can they?
Exactly, it's got to come from within. It sounds like such a cliche, but it's so true. I think recognizing that however supportive that network around you, ultimately it's down to you. You've got to work with the people around you to bring that through and bring you through. And that's why I love content so much. I love stories. If you look at when I did the film content workshop that I did, look at the hero's journey, the classic hero's journey in a movie that really touches us, really brings us in. It's because in some way we've all had that moment or those moments in our lives when we've had to be the hero in the story. We've had to, in order to just survive and get through and come out the other side. And I think that's why that works so well. Whenever, would have hit onto, there's a reason why they keep bringing that through in every story. Every scriptwriter will work with that. And it really connects with us, doesn't it, in an emotional way.
It is so important. And for me, I'm probably going to keep banging on about this in these interviews, but it's all about the fact that everybody is a hero and that we have all overcome something that makes us a hero and that's made us find that hero quality. Now, I know that you know a lot more than the average person about stories, so I'm really fascinated to know what a hero is to you.
It's somebody that is totally, absolutely centered, without getting too hippified, grounded in their own energy and their own place, in their place, that have got firm boundaries, that know when to allow in what they want to allow in, but also know when to deflect things that don't serve them, don't work for them, and actually are willing to fight for what they believe in. I use the word fight in terms of with a passion, having a passion for and voicing an opinion, standing up for others, standing up for themselves as well, for yourself. That's really important sometimes. Just having the courage to say to somebody, I respect your viewpoint, but actually that isn't for me. I'm sorry, I can't agree with that. And it can be said. It doesn't mean, I think that's where with social media, it's done this to people. We've all become in our own little tribes, but sometimes we can really lose sight of the commonalities. And that's what I love. I always look for the centre ground because I want people to come together. That's what I make great things. And I think that's really important. A true hero can do that without the need to kind of, we're bombarded with opinions in the media now, aren't we? Absolutely. It's all opinionated pieces. We've had to go down that route, arguably, as journalists have done, because they've got to keep up with citizen journalists out there, because it's all online very, very quickly. But in that, we need to have compromise. And I think that's part of it being a good hero too, is that actually allowing room for compromise and understanding. In an ideal world, there's that balance in all things, I'm a big fan of Yoda for that reason.
Who isn't?
I know, exactly. I mean, I was just looking at some of those quotes today, and he comes out with some classics. If you haven't looked them up, have a look, because they are amazing.
The thing that I found really interesting from what you've just said was the bit about boundaries and making sure that you're looking after yourself. Because so often we think that to be a hero, we've got to put everybody else first and take care of everybody else. And actually, you can't take care of everybody else if you're not looking after yourself as well. And I know that's something that I've been guilty of in the past. And I think it's so important to remember that it's not a bad thing to look after your energy and your needs, and whether that's telling somebody that you don't agree with what they've just said, or whether it's, backing out of something that you thought you'd have the energy to do but you haven't now, or, whatever context that comes in. It's so important that we look after ourselves, isn't it?
There's a reason for that. If you think about, if you're on a plane, they always ask you, it's the classic quote, isn't it? But you put your own mask on first before you help other people. There's a good reason for that. Sorry to interrupt you there.
No, that's okay. I was just going to say, you must have experienced that more than most people over the last few years, obviously with your diagnosis. It must be even more important for you to have those boundaries in place and to know what you're prepared to do and what you're not prepared to do.
Yeah, and I think what I really admire in a lot of my friendships, I would include you in that, Kate, and also, of course, my relationship with Taz, my wife, is having that beautiful ability to be able to just coax and sometimes push you to just go beyond that comfort zone a little bit, but not to the point where you feel that your boundaries are being broken, whatever. And I think that's really important. So, for instance, recently I did fairly recently, last year, was it last year or this year? I can't remember. I did a go ape up in the trees, and I was really terrified about doing that, mainly because I'm terrified of heights. I tell myself I'm terrified of heights. I'm not very good. And also because I was worried about the strength of my legs to be able to take me there. You know, obviously my legs have suffered quite a bit during my MS problems over the years, and yet I did it, and I wasn't going to do it. But discussing it, having those conversations, sometimes knowing that it's okay to do as much as you can do, but sometimes just having the courage to just take that first step. And even if it means that you just take part and you do 10 minutes instead of 2-3 hours, it doesn't matter, because you can sometimes surprise yourself with what comes from that. And I had it was incredibly healing thing, really, for me. It was an incredible experience, because I realised that actually there is more strength than I realised, physical strength as well as mental strength.
It's that classic thing, isn't it? If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always had. You know, you can't ever achieve something that you haven't achieved before unless you try. And it's interesting because, as you know, I've got joint problems and, you know, my body lets me down sometimes. But I had a similar experience at the start of the year. I started going to the gym thinking that I was never going to manage it. But the man who was running the sessions was amazing. He took a lot of time to sort of research my condition and see what was going to be good and what I should and shouldn't be doing, and made modifications for me. And by the time I'd gone for sort of 4 or 5 sessions, I felt like a different person. And I think it's so easy to tell yourself that you've had this diagnosis and that, you know, you shouldn't be doing X, Y, and Z. And I know that there's some things that I can't do. I can't run, for example. My knees just won't cope with me running. And I'm sure you're the same, you know, I'm sure you've found things that you just have to say, do you know what, that's just not for me. I can't do that anymore. But at the same time, there's always an alternative to get the result that we want, isn't there?
Exactly that. And I think of my mum again. My mum was 38 when she was diagnosed. Interestingly, so was I, the same age, which is a bit spooky. I always like to look at patterns, you know, familial patterns, which I find are very interesting. But Mum went through a stage where she was walking with sticks for a long time, but people used to think she was drunk because it affected her speech. So she would have slurred speech, her balance would be off. And actually, my mum could take a drink or 3, I can tell you that. My dad would have testified to that too, occasionally when she indulged. But one of the things that she taught me was that she would always try, she would always give it a go. And so for her, the big time was when she went from walking with sticks to going into a wheelchair. And that was a tough time for her, but she would always laugh at those moments when she would give things a try, and maybe it didn't go quite according to plan. You know, simple things like going off to disabled loos in the days before we had lots of facilities for people with disabilities, and going into a loo and not seeing the wet paint sign. And of course, she was holding on to all the armrails and came out covered. That was Mum having hysterics about that. It was red oxide paint, so you can imagine what that looked like. But it was her humour that got her through. Again, it's that willingness to kind of try things, because she'd said, I can manage this, I'll go in on my own, I'll be fine. You can just wait outside. And then the next thing, But the fact that she was willing to give it a go, and I think that really, I really admire that in people that do that. I know, like you, I'm sure, Kate, there's so many people that have struggled so much, you know, with various issues and challenges, but they keep going and they keep trying and they keep going on. And that, for me, that's part of being a huge hero too, isn't it?
Yeah. And I was just going to say as well, I think being able to laugh at yourself, that's got to be a superhero trait, hasn't it? You know, if you can't look at yourself and go, well, I tried, but look, didn't quite work out this time.
I was going to say, if you're wearing that lycra, you've got to be willing to laugh at yourself, haven't you? That revealing lycra. There's no other option, really, is there? I mean, no. You know, let's admit it, they've got amazing physiques, but even so, it's very revealing. So, yeah, you've got to have a bit of a sense of humour. But, yeah, joking aside, it's so important, isn't it?
It really is.
Laughter really is the best medicine. We've had hysterics. I still have memories in my mind. I had hysterics when things went wrong and she had a fall or something, and she was hurting, but she would still be laughing about it, and that would get us through. And she would get members of staff in the hospitals laughing as well. And that's a gift, isn't it?
That really is, yeah. And I bet they absolutely loved spending time with her because of that. because, not many people have got that ability to laugh in those times, have they? So you've talked quite a lot about your mum, and she's obviously one of your heroes.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
we were like cat and dog when she was here. I actually appreciate her more now she's gone. That's a sad thing to say, but I admit that. Now I get it more now. I was a daddy's girl, so yeah, sorry, I interrupted you again.
No,
So yes,
it's okay.
I've talked about mum.
Do you have any other heroes?
Have I had many other heroes? Oh, well, if I'm looking at kind of heroes from when I was a kid, I mean, it's got to be, I have to say, I know it's quite controversial, but I was an Enid Blyton fan. So for me, I loved The Folk of the Faraway Tree. That's so shamanic. I'm going to work with shamanic shamanism now, which is another thing for another day. But it's all about the trees and all the different journeys you could have up the tree into different worlds. I loved all that. I loved those books. I loved books from a very early age. And again, my mum was great with that because she taught me to read before I got to school. So I was an early learner. I was very lucky with that. And so I had that. I loved Robin Hood. Robin Hood was a hero of mine. Absolutely. Love anything to do with Robin Hood. But in terms of getting older, I guess, I don't know, just really good authors, because, the discipline it takes to write a book. I am writing one at the moment, and this time I'm actually going to finish it because I've got so many unfinished. But the discipline it takes to see it through all the way through to that last chapter, that last paragraph, that last line is quite something. So I have a huge amount of respect for authors. A little bit depressing, but I love Margaret Atwood, who wrote Handmaid's Tale and various other incredible books. Very, very dark, but how much she says in one sentence is just incredible. I just love the way she writes. It's just, you're just in there with it, absolutely feeling it. Not the most uplifting of topics, but...
Interestingly, I completely missed the TV series. I don't read a lot of fiction, which is, I don't know, maybe that's my downfall. Maybe I need to start doing more fiction reading. But my daughter's just started reading it because it's one of her potential A-level texts. So she went through the reading list and bought the ones that appealed. And she's literally just started reading it this week.
Ooh.
And she said, it's amazing. So now I'm like, well, when you finished it? Because she's absolutely loving it.
Yeah, you can get the audiobook through Audible. And that's what I was doing this afternoon. I took a break this afternoon. I was doing a bit of washing up and I put it on. As I said, it's not the most joyful text, but it is amazing. I'm so glad she's enjoying it. I can see why she would. It's incredible writing.
It's interesting that you have referenced lots of people that you look up to, and possibly with the exception of Robin Hood, although I don't think even Robin Hood would be a classical, hero character, But I love the fact that they're obviously people that have massively inspired you. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because time does change. And, I was like you, I loved Enid Blyton. And I can see why it's controversial and why she's perhaps not as popular with children today. But at the same time, I know very few people who are our generation who didn't love The Folk of the Faraway Tree or The Famous Five or The Secret Seven or, whatever it was. She definitely knew how to key into that age range at that time, didn't she? And I think it's really interesting because I think there'll always be hero characters that have that longevity. And, Robin Hood's a classic example of that, isn't he? For centuries, people have, read about his tales and sort of, pretended to be Robin Hood while they've been running around in the forest. But other people, perhaps like Enid Blyton's characters, might slowly die off now. But that's okay as well because we're living in different times. And we don't need the same role models that we had generations ago. We need role models for the new world that we're living in. So, do you have a superhero, Asha? Like a proper superhero, like cape wearing, rather than just a hero?
Okay, it's got to be Wonder Woman, hasn't it? It's got to be Wonder Woman. I mean, mainly because, like my wife, I have Wonder Woman underwear too. And I personally find it's really empowering to wear it sometimes when you need to. Sorry for the detail, everybody. Hope you're not eating your breakfast or something listening to this. But I love the story with that. I love the kind of mythology around it. I love all of that. I think she's a fabulous character. I mean, I was brought up in 1970s, so you imagine it was Diana. I've forgotten the actress.
Linda Carter.
Name, tell me. Linda Carter. So
yeah,
Diana. So she was amazing, and her lasso of truth and all of that stuff. I was brought up with that stuff. It was fantastic. So it's got to be. That's for me is the ultimate superhero, I think.
Don't you think it's interesting? Because obviously I'm focusing on interviewing women. I'm not ruling out the fact that I might interview some men along the way, but at the minute I'm focusing on women. And when you ask for a female superhero, there's not a lot of choice, is there? And everybody lists Wonder Woman because she's pretty much all we had, especially our generation. I know there's a few more creeping in now, but for us as young girls, it was Wonder Woman or nothing, really, wasn't it? Unless you sort of looked for heroes in the broader sense.
What about Buffy? We could kind of put Buffy in there maybe, because Buffy and the Vampire Slayer, pretty cool. Good martial arts. I mean,
Absolutely.
And those stories actually within that program. I was not a huge fan of Buffy at all, but my wife is, and she used to watch, series after series. And in the end, it's a case of, join it or just ignore it. So I thought, okay, I'm going to try this. But actually, there's some great storylines in the Buffy series too. Some fantastic characters.
I wonder whether we can put people like Hermione Granger in there now as well.
Definitely.
For the next generation. I know she's not classically a superhero in the sort of cape wearing, sense, but she certainly has magical powers. She certainly fights for good, She uses her intelligence, which definitely appeals to me. And I know she had a massive influence on my daughter. She got hugely into Harry Potter at just the right age, to the extent that her speech was affected by the way Hermione spoke, and
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
completely. And I do think that as role models go for girls, she's definitely up there, isn't she?
She definitely is. I would include her without a doubt. And also the Hunger Games, again, a bit of a dystopian future, but what an amazing character Katniss Everdeen is, isn't she? Absolutely, she's amazing. Just there's the bow and arrow, there's a connection there, isn't there, somewhere? Because she had a bow and arrow, Robin Hood had a bow and arrow. Maybe I need to look into that a bit more. But, it's absolutely, it is a very dark tale, but I think they're great books, actually. I was quite disappointed in the third one of the trilogy, but I still enjoyed them. I liked the first one, I thought that was fab. And I love Jennifer Lawrence, I think she's an amazing actress for the film.
It's nice to see, isn't it, that there are more female role models from that point of view creeping in, I think. And I think as well, we're seeing more women, and I'm sure you'll have seen this in your job, we're definitely seeing more older female role models, which was something that just didn't exist, did it? You got to childbearing age and you were basically struck off unless they needed an old lady with, a blue rinse and a perm to play somebody. Whereas now we're getting some really quite empowered sort of older women in film and literature as well, which is really nice.
It is. You look at somebody like Helen Mirren. I mean, Helen Mirren is, goodness me, nearly 70, I believe. She might even be 70, I don't know. She looks amazing, doesn't she? But she's so outspoken. I love her. I tell you who I love as well. A lot of people might go, oh, but I love Miriam Margolyes. I think she's amazing. I don't know if you've been seeing, there's a documentary series on at the moment with her, and I know sometimes she says the most horrendous things and it makes you cringe, but you know what? She's going out there, she's travelling Australia, she's 70, I don't know, late 70s, isn't she? And she just doesn't care and she goes for it. And part of me is thinking, go on, Miriam, go on. And I love that about her. I love her energy. She's she can tankerous old what's it, but she owns it. She doesn't apologise for it.
She does, and I think she must have spent so much of her life hiding elements of herself to be able to get to where she did, that now she's got to a point in her life where she doesn't care as much and the world's more accepting of who she really is. She must just feel like just letting it all just fall out and, just let the world cope with it. Yeah.
you never know what you're going to get with her, do you?
No,
You never know.
she's amazing. But we've got so many older, amazing, strong role models, haven't we now? You know, think about, you know, Judi Dench and Julie Walters and, you know, all those people that we grew up seeing as the mum figure who are now getting to the stage where they should be playing the grandmas, and actually they're not. They're not playing that type of character at all, you know. You look at Judi Dench in the Bond films and it's just like, it's mind-blowing, isn't it? You know, that they've allowed that to happen.
Yeah, she's amazing to watch, and I love seeing her interviewed because she seems like she's really got her feet on the ground. You know, she's not doesn't come across as starry at all. Very, very grounded and full of sense, and still likes a good time. I think still very witty and very funny to watch.
And another
Amazing
link to your
actress.
trees. Did
Yes,
you see the
of
documentary
course.
that she did about the trees? That was
Yes,
incredible.
I
Yeah,
know, it's incredible. I think she just is very grounded, isn't it? It doesn't surprise me that she would do a documentary like that because she is. She's got very firm roots, and again, coming back to those boundaries we talked about, she's very. I always get that impression. We're very, very comfortable with her own boundaries and what she'll accept and what she won't. And that, for me, is a superhero, isn't it? Goodness me.
absolutely. And I think it's really important that women of a certain age have somebody to look to say, do you know what? I don't have to just sit back and be quiet. You know, I can start living my life now. You know, if you've sort of taken a back seat because you've been bringing up children or looking after other people or whatever, it's really lovely to be able to look at somebody and go, well, actually, I can keep going. You know, I don't have to just sit back and learn to knit or, you know.
That's exactly it.
It's
isn't
really
it?
empowering, isn't it?
It
You need
is, isn't
somebody
it?
on that next step on the ladder, don't you, to be able to say, well, if she can do it, I can.
Yeah, I love that. And I think we need more of that because so often in media, we haven't seen women in that light at all. We've always, even in dramas, it's only in recent years that we've started to see quite powerful characters. But the women are very often secondary to the male lead. And the storyline is very much, they're their partner, their wife, their sister, but they haven't got a really strong physical presence, storyline within it where they're the key character. And I think that's what we need more of. We're starting to see that. And I think things are changing, but it's about blooming time, isn't it? Because I don't know about you, when we grew up, it was very different, wasn't it?
It really was. And funnily enough, just today I saw an article about the fact that they're re-releasing a lot of classic novels that were written under pseudonyms with the author's original name, with their actual name rather than their pen name. So, works by people like George Eliot and, all those women who hid behind male names or just using their initials are being re-released with their actual name, which I just think is amazing. It must be wonderful for the families who are still around of those authors to finally see their true identity and see them appreciated for who they really were. Because there must be so many people who look back and go, George Eliot, that must be a man.
Because in our history books, we've been presented with stories from the past from a male perspective, haven't we? All too often. That's not, and that's important. Of course, it's important. But again, coming back to that balance, there needs to be a balance and saying we want to see and hear women's stories and hear about because their interpretation of history, their view on certain aspects of the history that we're reading about would be so very different. The story of somebody that is a mum at home in the Second World War with 3 kids will be very different to the husband who's either, whatever he's doing, he's off fighting for the country or doing something. It's going to be very different. We see that aspect, but again, we don't see a lot from the female perspective in the way that we do with that whole kind of going to war and all of that. And I feel like there needs to be a balance addressed there. I think it's up to the script writers and the writers to bring that through. And there are some writers that do it beautifully, I think. Sarah Waters is one.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Sarah Waters. The Night Watch is a really good book. I don't know if you've read it, but it's a really, really good book.
I haven't, but I've
Set in the
heard a lot
Second World
about
War.
it.
Strong female characters, which she always does very well. I've actually met Sarah Waters. I've got a signed book, and she's amazing and so humble with it. She's lovely.
Talking about the way history is represented, again, my daughter's coming up a lot this interview, but she introduced me to the musical Six, which I don't know whether you're familiar with it. It's about Henry VIII's wives, and it's presented as almost like a X Factor type competition where they've got to stand up and sing a song about themselves and compete for who was the best wife. And it's fabulous because you hear all about their background. You know, obviously we know quite a lot about them because they were married to the king. And you hear about, you know, whether they wanted to marry him, whether they were secretly in love with somebody else at the time that he took an interest, whether it was, you know, manipulation on their part that got them in, and all that side of things. But the last song, they basically say, look, I did all these amazing things, and you'd still not have heard of me if I hadn't happened to marry him, you know. I think it's Catherine Parr, isn't it, that outlived him? If I've got that wrong, I apologise to my daughter.
No, Catherine Howard, Catherine Parr. I'm thinking about The Order. Yeah, I'm with you on that. Died, beheaded, survived. Yeah, exactly, all of that stuff. Yes.
But she, you know, she was an author, and she wrote meditation and poetry and all sorts of things. And she did amazing things for women's rights in the scheme of her time. And yet she could have done all that, and had she not been married to Henry VIII, we'd probably never have heard of her. You know, that's the reality, isn't it? And so much of history is based on who people were associated with, and that's the only reason we hear about the women, you know. And I think at some point there might have to be some weaving in to the history books. You know, somebody's going to have to go back through and insert the women back in, because, you know, we're learning all the time about the fact that it was actually somebody's wife who made a discovery, but he, you know, laid claim to it because he was the man and he could legally. And, you know, I think it's about time we righted all that and actually change the history books to, you know, to represent that.
Wouldn't that be a cool job though? Wouldn't it, Kate? Can you imagine having that job to go back and weave it into that? What an incredible job that would be. What a job, what a hell of a huge job, but wow.
Huge job, yeah.
Long overdue.
But, you know, it would be amazing, wouldn't it? So, Asha, last question. What is your superpower?
Ooh, good one. That's a difficult one. Do you get a lot of people going, oh, I don't know. I say I'm a people person. I'm a weird mix of introvert and love people. I think I'm a very typical writer, actually. I think that goes with the territory. But I think what I'm good at is showing compassion and sitting with somebody, just holding space for somebody. I would say that if I was working shamanically, would hold space. To being there for someone. I think that's one that I do very well. So empathy, being empathetic, and being willing to laugh at myself actually as well, which is really important. You know, being what we would term almost like the sacred clown. But sometimes having that humour, having the ability to be able to show your own frailties to help somebody else. I think that's one of my things.
You are incredibly good at listening. I can definitely vouch for that. You're very good at sort of, holding space. I think that's a fairly well-used term these days, not just in spiritual and shamanic work. I think most people understand that phrase now. Yeah. I think you're an incredible person, and I think the work that you're doing is amazing. I love the fact that you are helping people to tell their story, because that's such a huge part of what I want to do. I feel that everybody's got a story, and not everybody needs to write a book, but everybody needs to know that it's okay to own that story. You know, whether it's just being brave enough to talk about things that they've been through in the past when they're sat talking to somebody in a coffee shop, even though it might be a little bit taboo, or, you know, somebody might not necessarily approve of something that's happened to them, or if it's going to make them feel uncomfortable. I think the older I get and the more people I talk to, the more I realise that everybody has been through such huge things, you know, and like you said at the beginning, you don't see it in yourself. You don't see that you've achieved amazing things. You don't see that you've been capable of overcoming all these challenges, but we all see it in other people. And I think if we never get brave enough to talk to other people about what we've been through, then we never get a chance to have that reflected back at us and see how people react and and to realise our true strength and what our true superhero powers are. So I think, you know, to be encouraging people to write and create content around themselves and their story and their businesses is just brilliant. So thank you so much for coming and being interviewed today.
I know, the boot's usually on the other foot. I'm telling you, this is really awkward because I'm usually the one doing the interview. It's just really weird. I'm like, oh God, I've got sweaty palms and everything. Sorry, much information.
I'm finding it really interesting because I'm exactly the opposite. I'm usually the person being interviewed, and I find it really challenging, actually, you know, sort of keeping the structure and things and not just sitting and having a nice chat. So thank you for making that so easy for me. You're such a professional. And yeah,
Oh, you're welcome.
I'm sure I'll speak to you soon.
You will do. It's been great. Thank you, Kate. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you for joining me, and I'll be back soon with another interview for the Superwoman Life.